The German paperwork said they were dead. Somewhere in a staff office in Belgrade, an Oberleutnant flipped through the latest reports. Another B-24 Liberator hit over Romania, burning as it limped west. A scattering of parachutes over the jagged green of Yugoslavia. No wreckage found. No captured crew delivered to a Stalag. Status: presumed killed in action. On paper, those 10 American airmen vanished into the war. In reality, one of them was standing on a hillside in central Serbia, shivering in the pre-dawn cold, watching a bonfire blaze in the middle of a rough mountain meadow that a week earlier had been just another cow pasture. He could hear the growl of engines now, twin pistons echoing off the dark slopes. Every man around him, Americans in torn flight jackets, Serbian peasants in coarse shirts, Chetnik guerrillas in ragged uniforms, looked up at the same patch of sky. The signal fire flared brighter as another armful of brush went on. 2 lines of improvised flare pots marked out something that, with a little imagination and a lot of courage, could be called a runway. Out of the black appeared the blunt nose of a C-47 Dakota, sliding down a shallow approach path that no sane pilot would have attempted in daylight, let alone on a night in 1944, over enemy territory, onto an airstrip that had been hacked out of a hillside by hand. If the pilot misjudged by 50 yards, he'd plow into rock and forest and turn everyone inside into exactly what the Germans thought those airmen already were. Dead. The American standing on the hillside swallowed hard. A month earlier, he'd been crouched behind a Norden bomb site over Ploiești, Romania, watching oil refineries turn into firestorms under his crosshairs. Now he stood with hundreds of other ghosts, supposedly lost crews from B-24s and B-17s, waiting to find out if their resurrection would stick. How he got here began with another aircraft and another night jump. 6 weeks earlier, August 2nd, 1944, just before midnight. A single C-47 crossed the spine of Yugoslavia at low altitude, hugging the dark contours of the land. Inside, 3 men in parachutes waited at the open door, the slipstream clawing at their uniforms. The lead jumper was Captain George Musulin, 29 years old, Serbian American, born in New York, raised in Pennsylvania, guard on the 1937 University of Pittsburgh football team, national champions. He'd gone from pro football in Chicago, St. Louis, and Pittsburgh to the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the United States' new, raw intelligence service that would one day become the CIA. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and he spoke fluent Serbian. Behind him stood Master Sergeant Mike Rajacich, also Serbian American, a radio operator who knew Morse code as well as he knew his own heartbeat. He'd been briefed as the man who talks to Bari. Last in the line was Specialist Arthur Jibilian, 21, Lebanese American from Ohio, communications expert. Didn't speak a word of Serbian. That didn't matter. His job was to keep a shortwave set talking to Allied headquarters in Bari, Italy, 300 miles away across the Adriatic. The pilot shouted back from the cockpit, voice barely cutting through the engine noise. "Target ahead! Look for the fire!" Musulin leaned into the slipstream and scanned the darkness below. Forest, ravines, a few faint specks of lamplight in distant villages. Then, in a mountain meadow above the village of Pranjani, a single orange pinprick flashed, grew, and settled into the steady pulse of a controlled bonfire. The signal. Musulin turned, grinned at Rajacich and Jibilian, and slapped the younger man on the shoulder. "See you on the ground, Jibby." The green light came on. They stepped into nothing. The shock of the jump never fully goes away no matter how much training you have. One moment there's a steel floor under your boots. The next there's only air, and the roar goes from deafening to something hollow and high as the parachute jerks you upright. The 3 OSS men drifted down through cold mountain air, canopies barely visible above them. The bonfire swung back and forth in their view as the wind carried them off the exact drop point. They hit hard. Musulin crashed into a rocky slope, rolled, felt something tear in his shoulder, then found himself tangled in parachute lines. He sliced free, hand on the butt of his .45, heart thudding in his throat. Jibby landed in brush and an unseen ditch, his radio bundle slamming into his ribs. Rajacich hit a little clearer, already trying to get his bearings and listen for any sound of German voices. Instead, within minutes, they heard something else. Boots. Soft curses in Serbian. The clack of rifles being readied. Figures melted out of the tree line. Bearded men in a mix of Royal Yugoslav uniforms and peasant clothes. Slung Mausers and Italian carbines catching the firelight. Chetniks. They weren't German. That was enough for a start. A man stepped forward. Fur cap, heavy mustache, bandoliers across his chest. He said something in Serbian. Musulin answered in the same language. The man's shoulders relaxed a fraction. The Americans had landed in the arms of the one resistance movement in the Balkans that Washington and London were trying very hard not to talk about in public anymore. General Draža Mihailović's Chetniks. The guerrillas hustled the 3 OSS men away from the drop zone and down goat tracks by lantern light to a farmhouse tucked into the hills. Inside, in a low-ceilinged room smelling of smoke and sweat, Captain Musulin finally stood face to face with the man he'd been sent to find. Draža Mihailović was 51, gray-bearded, hair thinning, eyes sharp and tired. A former colonel in the Royal Yugoslav Army. When Yugoslavia collapsed under German invasion in 1941, he'd refused to surrender, taken a handful of men into the hills, and begun a resistance war that had now lasted 3 brutal years. The Germans controlled the cities, the roads, the rail lines. Mihailović controlled patches of the countryside, knitted together by loyalty, language, and a lot of blood. He eyed Musulin with a mix of curiosity and something like hurt pride. Through an interpreter, he got straight to business. "Your men," he said. "They are safe. All of them." Musulin frowned. "How many is all?" Mihailović spread his hands. 250, maybe more, scattered across the hills. We are gathering them here. The number hit Musulin like a physical blow. 250 American airmen. Shot down over Yugoslavia while hitting the oil refineries at Ploiești and other targets. Saved from German patrols by villagers who barely had enough to feed their own children. Guided into the hills by Chetnik escorts. Hidden in barns and caves and back rooms for weeks. On the books in Italy and Washington, they were MIA or KIA. Standing in that farmhouse, Musulin realized they were very much alive, and very much trapped. Getting 3 OSS men in had been hard enough. Getting hundreds of downed flyers out, with the Germans still everywhere and Allied politics working against Mihailović, was going to take something bordering on impossible. And in Bari, the men who could approve that impossibility were still arguing about whether the Chetniks were friends, enemies, or an embarrassment best ignored. That argument, and how a handful of officers pushed past it, is where part 2 begins.